They say that the people closest to you know exactly where to strike, because they know where it hurts the most. For 7 years, I thought I was building a life with a woman who loved me. Her name was Sarah. She had this gentle smile, the kind of laugh that could make you forget your worst days, and a way of making you feel like you were the only person in the room. But looking back, I realized that it was all an act. A perfectly rehearsed performance by a master manipulator. My name is David, and I used to believe that hard work and loyalty were enough to keep a family together. I was wrong. In the end, it wasn't an enemy who brought me to my knees. It was the woman who slept right next to me every single night. Our life looked perfect from the outside. We had a beautiful home in the suburbs, a stable income, and a small engineering firm that I had built from the ground up through endless sleepless nights. She didn't ask how my day was. She just coldly said, "We need more money, David. The lifestyle we are living isn't enough anymore." I laughed it off, thinking she was just stressed. But she wasn't joking. Her eyes were cold, calculating, and completely detached. Over the next few months, strange things began to happen at my company. Small financial discrepancies started appearing in our accounts. Digital files containing our most sensitive project designs were being accessed at odd hours of the night. At first, I blamed it on technical glitches or careless mistakes by my junior staff. I trusted my team, and more importantly, I trusted my wife. I never could have imagined that the security breach wasn't coming from an outside hacker or a disgruntled employee. It was coming from inside my own home. Sarah had managed to copy my master password log, giving her total access to everything I owned. One evening, I stayed late at the office to audit the missing funds. The deeper I dug, the more sick I felt. Over $50,000 had been transferred out of our corporate reserves into an offshore account that I had never heard of. My heart was pounding in my chest. I called Sarah, my voice shaking with panic, telling her that someone was stealing from us. Her response on the phone was eerily calm. She told me to come home, relax, and that we would figure it out tomorrow. She sounded so supportive, so caring. It makes my skin crawl now to remember how easily she lied to my face while she was actively pulling the rug out from under my feet. When I arrived home that night, the house was dark. The front door was unlocked. As I walked into the living room, the lights suddenly flickered on. Standing there wasn't just Sarah. Alongside her was a man in a sharp gray suit holding a briefcase, and next to him was Mark, my primary business partner and a man I considered a brother. The look on their faces told me everything I needed to know before a single word was spoken. They weren't there to help me solve a mystery. They were there to deliver the final blow. Sarah looked at me, her gentle smile completely gone, replaced by a cold, triumphant sneer. "It's over, David," she said softly. "You've worked very hard, but it's time for you to step aside. We're taking the company, we're taking the house, and we're leaving you with nothing." I stood there, frozen, trying to process the absolute betrayal. The woman I loved and the partner I trusted had joined forces to completely wipe me out. But as I looked at the legal documents the man in the suit held out to me, a small, quiet spark ignited inside my chest. They thought they had trapped me. They thought I would break. What they didn't know was that they had just started a war, and I had no intention of losing. To understand how a betrayal this deep is even possible, you have to understand the foundation it was built upon. Sarah and I met in college. She was studying marketing, and I was buried in engineering books. She brought color into my otherwise structured, black and white world. When I started my business, she was the one who encouraged me to take the leap. We lived on cheap noodles, shared a tiny one-bedroom apartment, and dreamed of the future. I poured every ounce of my energy into building a legacy, believing that every dollar I earned was a brick in the wall protecting our happiness. But wealth changes people, or perhaps, it simply reveals who they truly were all along. As the business grew, Sarah's inner circle shifted. She began spending time with a crowd that valued appearance over substance. She became obsessed with social media status, luxury brands, and projecting an image of absolute perfection. I was too busy working to notice that her values were rotting away. I thought buying her the expensive cars and funding the lavish trips was my way of rewarding her for standing by me in the early days. In reality, I was feeding a monster that would never be satisfied. About a year before everything fell apart, Sarah suggested that we hire an external consultant to handle our company's growing marketing and public relations needs. She highly recommended a man named Mark. She claimed he was a brilliant strategist who had helped several startups scale into multi-million-dollar enterprises. Trusting her judgment completely, I brought Mark into the inner circle. He was charismatic, sharp, and quickly integrated himself into both our business and our social life. He became a regular guest at our dinner table. I thought I had found a brilliant ally. What I didn't see were the lingering glances between them across the dinner table. I didn't notice how Sarah would suddenly dress up more whenever Mark was coming over for a business meeting. I was blinded by my own loyalty. I assumed that because I was entirely faithful and dedicated, the people around me operated with the same code of honor. This was my greatest mistake. My trust wasn't a virtue. It was a vulnerability that they exploited with surgical precision. They used my long hours at the office as a shield to hide their growing affair, and their conspiracy to steal my life's work. Mark began planting seeds of doubt in my mind about our financial security. He would show me falsified reports suggesting that our competitors were closing in, and that we needed to restructure our corporate assets to protect ourselves from liability. Because he was the expert, I listened. He convinced me to sign documents that shifted certain administrative powers and signing authorities over to a secondary holding company. He told me it was a standard legal strategy to safeguard our wealth. I signed those papers without a second thought, believing I was protecting Sarah. In reality, I was signing my own financial death warrant. While Mark handled the corporate side of the manipulation, Sarah handled the personal side. She started gaslighting me at home, creating arguments out of nothing. She would accuse me of being emotionally distant, of caring more about my engineering projects than our marriage. She was intentionally creating a paper trail of marital discord. She wanted everyone in our social circle to believe that I was an unstable, neglectful husband. That way, when she finally made her move, no one would question her actions. She was setting the stage to play the victim, while secretly acting as the executioner. The level of detail they put into their plan was terrifying. Sarah began taking secretly recorded videos of me during our arguments. She would intentionally provoke me, waiting until I was exhausted and frustrated, and then hit record the moment I raised my voice in frustration. She was compiling evidence to use against me in a divorce court, looking to paint a picture of a hostile environment. I was walking through a minefield completely blind, completely unaware that the woman I loved was waiting for the perfect moment to detonate the explosives under my feet. Standing in my own living room, looking at Sarah, Mark, and their lawyer, the world seemed to move in slow motion. The betrayal didn't hit me as a wave of sadness. It hit me as a cold, paralyzing shock. Mark stepped forward, avoiding my eyes, and slid a thick stack of papers across the kitchen island. "David, let's keep this professional," he said, his voice entirely devoid of the warmth he usually feigned. "We have the voting majority in the holding company now. We've also filed for divorce on grounds of emotional cruelty and financial mismanagement. You need to sign these transition papers and leave the property tonight." I looked at Sarah. "Is this really what you want?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. She crossed her arms, her eyes hard as stone. "You brought this on yourself, David. You became obsessed with your work, you neglected this family, and you've been secretly draining our corporate accounts. We have the bank records to prove it." I was stunned. I was the one draining the accounts? Then it hit me. The $50,000 that had vanished into an offshore account, they hadn't just stolen it. They had transferred it using my digital signature to make it look like I was hiding money from the court before a divorce. They had framed me perfectly. To the legal system, it looked like I was a corrupt business owner who was hoarding money from his wife while being abusive at home. If I fought them in court with standard methods, the evidence they had manufactured would ruin me. I would lose my company, my life savings, and my reputation would be utterly destroyed in the industry. The lawyer stepped forward, tapping his pen on the paper. If you sign tonight, Sarah has agreed not to press criminal charges for corporate embezzlement. We will give you a small severance, and you can walk away with your freedom. They thought they had me completely cornered. They expected me to panic, to yell, or to break down in tears and sign away my life just to escape the pressure. And for a second, I almost did. The weight of the deception felt like iron on my chest. But as I looked at the smug, arrogant smile growing on Mark's face, something flipped inside my mind. The sadness vanished, replaced by an icy, crystal-clear focus. I realized that playing by their rules would guarantee my destruction. If I wanted justice, I had to stop acting like a victim and start thinking like a strategist. I looked down at the papers, then looked back up at the three of them. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't show an ounce of anger. I simply slid the documents back toward the lawyer. I won't be signing anything tonight, I said calmly. Mark's smile faded, and Sarah's eyes narrowed. David, don't be stupid, she snapped. You have nothing left. If you walk out that door without signing, we will ruin you by tomorrow morning. I picked up my car keys from the counter. Then I guess we'll see what tomorrow brings, I replied, turned around, and walked out into the cold night air. I drove away from my home with nothing but my phone, my wallet, and the clothes on my back. I checked into a cheap, rundown motel on the edge of the city. The room smelled of old smoke, and the neon sign outside buzzed loudly against the window. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the peeling wallpaper. The silence was deafening. My entire life had been erased in the span of an hour. But as I sat there in the dark, the initial shock began to melt away, leaving behind a profound sense of clarity. They thought they had won because they took my physical assets. But they forgot one crucial thing. They didn't take my mind. I pulled out my personal laptop, which I luckily had in my car. I knew that standard legal battles would take months and play right into their hands. They had prepared for a legal fight. They had falsified documents ready for a courtroom. To beat them, I needed to find the one thing they couldn't falsify: the absolute truth. I needed to trace that offshore account, find out where the money was actually going, and prove their collusion. It was going to be a grueling, dangerous journey, but I made a silent promise to myself in that miserable motel room. I would not stop until their entire wall of lies came crashing down around them. The first rule of rebuilding from nothing is to evaluate what resources you have left. I knew I couldn't walk into my office. Mark would have already revoked my access and informed security. I couldn't access our primary bank accounts because they were frozen due to the pending divorce filing. I was financially crippled, but I wasn't entirely powerless. Over my 15 years in the engineering industry, I had built deep, unshakable relationships with people who valued my integrity. I needed an ally, someone who was outside of Sarah and Mark's sphere of influence, but who possessed the technical skills to help me dig up the truth. I contacted an old friend named James. James was a brilliant cybersecurity expert and forensic accountant who used to work for federal agencies before starting his own private consulting firm. We met at a quiet, out-of-the-way diner at dawn. When I told him what had happened, he didn't pity me. He didn't offer empty words of comfort. He simply pulled out his tablet and said, "Let's get to work. No one gets away with stealing a man's life like that." James knew how the digital world worked. He knew that no matter how clever a criminal thinks they are, they always leave a digital footprint. Our first target was the offshore account. Sarah and Mark had used my digital signature to transfer the $50,000, making it look like I was embezzling my own company's money. But James explained that a digital signature requires an IP address, a unique digital location showing exactly where the computer was located when the document was signed. We spent 12 hours straight inside James's office, tracking the metadata of that specific transfer. When the results finally loaded on the screen, a massive piece of the puzzle fell into place. The transfer hadn't been made from my office computer, nor had it been made from my laptop. The IP address traced directly back to a boutique hotel downtown. I remembered that specific date. It was a weekend when I was out of town attending an engineering conference. Sarah had told me she was staying home to rest, but the digital records showed that her laptop and Mark's personal phone were both connected to the hotel's network at the exact minute the funds were moved. They hadn't just framed me. They had done it while celebrating their betrayal in a luxury suite paid for with my company's credit card. "This is good, David," James said, pointing at the screen. "It proves you weren't the one who authorized the transfer. But a judge might still see it as a domestic dispute. We need something bigger. We need proof of their long-term plan to intentionally sabotage your business." To get that, we needed access to Mark's private communications. We knew he used a secondary, encrypted messaging app to coordinate with Sarah. We couldn't legally hack his phone, but we didn't need to. Mark had a habit of backing up his work phone data to a shared cloud drive that we used for company projects years ago. He had forgotten to remove his old personal accounts from the sync list. It took James another 2 days to crack the legacy access codes to that old cloud archive. When the folder finally opened, it felt like opening a vault filled with toxic secrets. There were thousands of text messages, emails, and voice notes exchanged between Sarah and Mark spanning over 18 months. They talked about me as if I were a piece of property to be liquidated. They joked about how easy it was to manipulate me. In one chilling voice note, Sarah said, "He's so busy trying to build a future for us that he doesn't see we're stealing his present. By the time he realizes what happened, it will be too late." Hearing those words spoken in the voice of the woman I had loved for nearly a decade was a physical blow. It felt like a knife twisting in my stomach. But I forced myself to swallow the pain and channel it into focus. The messages didn't just contain emotional betrayals. They contained detailed plans of how they intended to sell my proprietary engineering designs to a foreign competitor for millions of dollars once they successfully forced me out of the company. This wasn't just a bitter divorce anymore. This was corporate espionage and fraud on a massive scale. They were about to commit a major crime, and I now held the entire blueprint of their downfall. With the evidence accumulating on my hard drive, I knew I had to play the long game. If I moved too fast and confronted them immediately, they would destroy their devices, hide the offshore money, and use their legal team to tie me up in court for years until I ran out of money. I needed them to believe they had completely won. I needed them to become arrogant, because arrogant people make catastrophic mistakes. I instructed my lawyer to send a formal response to their divorce team, stating that I was deeply depressed, overwhelmed, and requested a 30-day extension to review the settlement papers before signing. When Sarah received that letter, she called me. It was the first time we had spoken since that fateful night. Her voice was filled with a sickening mix of fake pity and condescension. "David, I'm glad you're finally being realistic," she said. "There's no point in dragging this out. Just accept that things changed. Take the small severance and try to rebuild your life somewhere else." I forced my voice to sound broken, weak, and defeated. "I just need time, Sarah. You took everything. I'm staying at a terrible place, and I just need a month to figure out where I'm going to live." She laughed softly, a sound that completely cured any remaining affection I had for her. "Fine, David. 30 days. But don't think you can change the outcome." She hung up, completely convinced that I was a broken man hiding in a dark hole. In reality, I was standing in a command center we had set up in James's office, surrounded by monitors tracking every move she and Mark made. Because they thought I was defeated, they let their guard down completely. They stopped hiding. Mark began openly driving my luxury car, and Sarah began spending corporate funds on massive shopping sprees, thinking the company was fully hers. While they were celebrating their unearned victory, I was busy building a shadow network. I secretly contacted the core engineers and project managers at my firm, the actual brains behind our success. These were people I had hired, mentored, and treated like family. I invited them to private meetings one by one at a quiet location. I didn't just tell them a sob story. I showed them the concrete evidence. I showed them the messages where Mark and Sarah planned to sell our proprietary technology to a competitor. A move that would inevitably lead to the company being liquidated, and all of them losing their jobs. The reaction from my team was immediate fury. They realized that Mark and Sarah weren't just destroying me. They were destroying the livelihoods of every single person who worked for the company. "What do you want us to do, David?" my lead engineer, Marcus, asked, his fists clenched in anger. "Tell us the plan and we're with you." I smiled. This was the turning point. I told them to return to work, behave exactly as if nothing was wrong, and cooperate fully with Mark. But behind the scenes, they were to begin duplicating all our active projects and archiving them on a secure, external server that only I controlled. We were essentially creating a ghost version of the company. Mark was a smooth talker, but he didn't understand the complex engineering algorithms that made our software valuable. He didn't know that without the master encryption keys and the loyalty of the engineering team, the company's intellectual property was just worthless lines of code. While Mark was busy setting up a meeting with the foreign buyers to sell our designs for $3 million, my team was preparing to pull the plug on the entire system the moment I gave the command. The trap was being set, and Sarah and Mark were walking into it with their heads held high. They believed they were the smartest people in the room, completely oblivious to the fact that the very walls around them were being dismantled. Every step they took toward finalizing their illegal sale was being logged, documented, and prepared for presentation to authorities. I spent my nights reviewing the data, calculating the exact moment to strike. It couldn't be a day too early, or a day too late. It had to be at the exact second where their crime was fully committed, but before the damage could actually be done. As the 30-day deadline approached, the pressure inside their camp began to show. Arrogance is a fragile thing. It thrives when everything goes perfectly, but the moment a small gear misaligns, panic sets in. Mark had scheduled a massive presentation with the foreign investors at our corporate headquarters. This meeting was supposed to be the coronation of his new empire. He was going to sign the contract transferring our proprietary software codes in exchange for a massive wire transfer into their offshore account. Sarah had already booked a celebratory first-class trip to Europe for the following day. But 24 hours before the meeting, Mark realized he had a massive problem. He tried to access the master source code to package it for the buyers, but the files wouldn't open. The system was asking for a secondary security key, an administrative protocol that had been deeply buried in the software architecture since the day I created it. He hadn't noticed it before because my account had always bypassed it automatically. Now that he had deleted my profile from the corporate network, the system recognized him as an unauthorized user and locked down the core assets. Mark panicked. He called Marcus, the lead engineer, into his new lavish office. "What is this encryption block?" Mark demanded, slamming his hand on the desk. "Get it removed immediately. The investors arrive tomorrow morning, and this data needs to be ready for transfer." Marcus, playing his role perfectly, looked at the screen with feigned confusion. "I'm sorry, Mark. That's a hard-coded security lock embedded in the foundational layer. David is the only one who holds the master recovery phrase. Without him, the software is completely locked." The news hit Mark like a physical blow. He immediately called Sarah, and the two of them began arguing violently in the office, unaware that Marcus had left his phone on the desk with a live audio feed running directly to my laptop. Listening to them turn on each other was a fascinating psychological study. When things were easy, they loved each other. But the moment their greed was threatened, the claws came out. "You told me he was taken care of." Mark yelled at her. "You said he was broken. If we don't have that code tomorrow, the investors walk, and we are ruined." Sarah's voice was sharp, frantic. "Call him, Mark. He's desperate for money. Offer him $100,000 to come in and unlock the system. He's staying in a disgusting motel. He'll jump at the chance to get some quick cash." I sat in James's office, listening to the recording, a cold smile appearing on my face. A few minutes later, my phone rang. It was Mark. I let it ring 3 times before answering. making sure to make my voice sound tired and hesitant. "Hello," I said softly. "David." "My man." Mark's voice was suddenly bursting with fake, slimy enthusiasm. "Listen, I've been thinking about everything. Sarah and we feel bad about how things went down. We want to make it right. We're having a big corporate event tomorrow with some major international partners, and we realize there's a technical glitch in the old system that only you can fix. If you come in tomorrow morning at 10 and help us clear it up, I'll personally write you a check for $100,000 on the spot. What do you say? Let's put the past behind us." It was a pathetic, transparent lie. They didn't want to make things right. They wanted to use me one last time to secure their multi-million-dollar payday, and then they would throw me right back into the gutter. But this was the exact opportunity one had been waiting for. They were inviting me right into the center of their trap, completely unaware that I was bringing the entire cage with me. "Okay, Mark," I whispered, pretending to sound relieved and desperate. "I'll be there at 10 sharp. Please have the check ready. I really need it." I hung up the phone, looked at James and nodded. "It's time," I said. "Call the authorities. Tomorrow we end this." The next morning, the city was draped in a thick fog, matching the heavy atmosphere of the confrontation that was about to take place. I dressed in my best suit, the one I wore when I first founded the company. I didn't look like a defeated man hiding in a motel room anymore. I looked like the rightful owner of an empire returning to claim what was stolen. When I walked into the lobby of my corporate headquarters at exactly 9:55 a.m., the receptionist looked at me with a mix of shock and relief. The atmosphere in the building was electric. Every employee knew something monumental was about to happen, though most didn't know the full details. I took the elevator up to the executive boardroom on the top floor. Through the glass walls, I could see the scene perfectly orchestrated. Sitting on one side of the massive mahogany table were 3 foreign investors, sharp, serious men in tailored suits. On the other side stood Mark and Sarah. Mark was sweating through his expensive shirt, trying desperately to make small talk and hide his absolute panic. Sarah looked elegant, but her fingers were twitching nervously against her designer handbag. They were running out of time, and they knew it. As I opened the heavy glass doors and stepped into the room, all eyes turned to me. Mark's face lit up with a look of intense relief that quickly shifted into his classic, arrogant smirk. "Ah, David. Glad you could make it," he said loudly, trying to show the investors that he was the one in charge. "Gentlemen, this is David. He's our former technical consultant. He's just here to handle a routine system authorization for us before we sign the final contracts." He walked over to me, grabbed my shoulder tightly, and whispered in my ear, "Fix the code now. Do it fast and you get your money. Try anything smart, and I'll have security throw you down the stairs." I didn't say a word. I walked calmly over to the master computer terminal at the head of the table, which was projected onto a massive 80-inch screen for everyone in the room to see. Sarah watched me, her eyes filled with supreme satisfaction. She truly believed that even after destroying our marriage and stealing my life, she could still command me to do her bidding for a bit of cash. I plugged a small, black USB drive into the terminal. Mark frowned, stepping forward. "What is that, David? You don't need a flash drive just to enter a password." "I'm not entering a password, Mark," I said, my voice echoing clearly throughout the silent boardroom. I turned around to face the investors, speaking in perfect, professional English. "Gentlemen, before you sign any contracts today, there is some crucial corporate data you need to review. The technology you are attempting to purchase does not belong to Mark or Sarah. It is the intellectual property of a company that is currently undergoing an investigation for massive corporate fraud, embezzlement, and espionage." The room went dead silent. The lead investor lowered his pen, his eyebrows furrowing. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded in a thick accent. Mark turned completely pale, his eyes bulging. "He's lying. He's an unstable, disgruntled ex-employee who was fired for stealing," he screamed, turning to the security guard near the door. "Get him out of here. Now." But before the guard could even take a step, I pressed a single key on the keyboard. The massive screen behind me flickered, and instead of the engineering software, a massive folder of documents appeared. It wasn't just files. It was a beautifully organized, undeniable presentation of their entire crime. The top item displayed was a giant, high-definition printout of the text messages between Sarah and Mark, detailing their affair, their plan to frame me for embezzlement, and their explicit intent to illegally sell the software to these exact investors while bypassing federal trade laws. Right next to the text messages were the certified bank records tracing the $50,000 directly to their shared luxury hotel suite, complete with the IP address logs. The entire ugly, criminal truth was laid bare for the entire world to see. The reaction in the room was instantaneous chaos. The lead investor stood up so fast his leather chair slammed against the wall. He looked at the screen, then looked at Mark and Sarah with absolute disgust. "You tried to sell us stolen, compromised technology," he shouted. "This is an international legal disaster. The deal is off." He signaled his associates, and the three investors immediately grabbed their briefcases and began rushing out of the room, eager to distance themselves from a massive federal crime. Mark tried to chase after them, his voice cracking with desperation. "Wait. Please. It's a misunderstanding. We can fix this." But they didn't even look back. Sarah stood frozen by the window, her mouth wide open, staring at the screen as the recorded voice note played out loud through the boardroom speakers. Hearing her own voice expose her crimes in front of everyone completely broke her composure. Her face contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. She rushed at me, her fingers clawing at the air, completely losing all her elegant, high society pretense. "You ruined everything," she screamed, her voice shrill and unhinged. "You pathetic loser. I gave you years of my life. You think you're smart? You're nothing without me. I didn't move an inch. I didn't raise a hand to defend myself, because I didn't need to." The security guard, who had finally realized what was actually happening, stepped between us, firmly holding Sarah back as she raged and wept in hysterics. Mark turned around, his hands shaking, his face completely drained of color. He looked at me, his arrogance entirely shattered, replaced by a pathetic, desperate fear. "David, please," he stuttered, stepping forward with his hands raised in a begging gesture. "Don't do this. We can work something out. We can split the company 50-50. Think about what we built together. Don't destroy my life." I looked at him, feeling absolutely no anger, no hatred, only a deep, profound sense of pity for how small and cowardly he truly was. "I didn't destroy your life, Mark. You did," I said calmly. "You and Sarah thought that loyalty was a weakness. You thought that because I was a good man, I was a stupid man. You forgot that the same mind that built this entire company from nothing is more than capable of taking it back." As I spoke those words, the heavy glass doors of the boardroom opened once again. This time it wasn't security guards walking in. It was 4 plainclothes detectives from the Federal Financial Crimes Division, accompanied by James and my primary legal counsel. James walked over to the terminal, ejected the USB drive containing the finalized data log, and handed it directly to the lead detective. "Everything you need is right here, officer," James said. "The full data trail, the IP confirmations, and the admissions of guilt." The detective nodded, then walked over to Mark and Sarah, pulling iron handcuffs from his belt. "Mark Davies, Sarah Vance, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit grand larceny, corporate espionage, and financial fraud. You have the right to remain silent." As the metal cuffs clicked around Sarah's wrists, she looked at me one last time. There was no more rage in her eyes, only the crushing realization that she had lost everything. The wealth, the status, the luxury life she had coveted so much had vanished, replaced by a grim, cold reality of her own making. They were led out of the executive boardroom in front of the entire company, walking past row after row of employees who stood in silent satisfaction, watching the architects of their potential ruin being brought to justice. The aftermath of a storm is always quiet, but it requires an immense amount of work to clear the debris and rebuild. Once the police cars left the parking lot, I didn't celebrate. I didn't go out for a drink. I walked back into my original office, the one Mark had tried so desperately to claim as his own. I sat down in my old chair, took a deep breath, and looked out at the city skyline. For the past 30 days, I had lived in a constant state of survival, fueled by the necessity of clearing my name. Now that the battle was won, the exhaustion finally caught up with me. But a true leader doesn't rest while their people are still uncertain about the future. I immediately called an all-hands meeting in the main lobby. Every single employee gathered around, the air filled with nervous energy. They had just witnessed their managing partner and the founder's wife get carried away in handcuffs. They were terrified that the company was going to collapse, that their paychecks wouldn't clear, and that their families would suffer. I stood on the central staircase, looking out at the faces of the people who had stood by me in secret. "Listen to me, everyone," I said, my voice strong, steady, and filled with absolute certainty. "The chaos is over. The betrayal has been rooted out. I want to promise you here and now. No one is losing their job. Our contracts are secure. Our software is fully locked under my control. And tomorrow morning, we go back to doing what we do best, building the future." Mark and Sarah tried to sell our hard work for a quick payday, but they failed because they didn't realize that the true value of this company isn't in a piece of code. It's in the honesty, the hard work, and the dedication of every single person in this room. The lobby erupted into a massive wave of applause and cheers. Some of the older staff members had tears in their eyes. In that moment, I realized that my revenge wasn't just about punishing the people who hurt me. It was about protecting the people who trusted me. True justice isn't a destructive force, it's a restorative one. By taking back my company, I had saved dozens of families from financial ruin. I spent the rest of the day working closely with my financial team and James to untangle the corporate accounts, reversing the fraudulent transfers, and stabilizing our core capital. Within a week, the transition was complete. My legal team successfully petitioned the court to freeze all of Sarah's marital claims to our assets based on her proven criminal activity. In a divorce court, when a spouse is caught actively stealing and committing fraud against the marital estate, they lose their right to leverage. She wasn't getting the house. She wasn't getting a single dollar of my bank accounts, and she certainly wasn't getting a severance. She had traded a life of absolute luxury and security for a cold legal defense fund that she could barely afford. The company bounced back faster than anyone predicted. The story of how we uncovered the fraud actually enhanced our reputation in the engineering tech sector. Clients realized that our security protocols were so robust that even an internal conspiracy couldn't breach our core systems. New contracts began rolling in, larger and more lucrative than the ones we had lost. I moved out of that dingy motel room and returned to my home. Walking through those empty rooms was strange at first. The ghosts of a false love lingered in the corners. But I didn't feel sadness anymore. I felt clean. The illusion was gone, and the truth had set me free. Several months passed before the final sentencing came down. I didn't attend the trial. I didn't need to see them in a courtroom again. My legal team kept me updated on the proceedings. Because the evidence James and I compiled was so airtight, both Mark and Sarah chose to plead guilty rather than face a protracted trial that would inevitably carry a maximum sentence. Mark was sentenced to 6 years in a federal penitentiary for corporate fraud and grand larceny. His career in business was permanently over. His name would forever be a warning label in the corporate world. Sarah received a 4-year sentence. The woman who couldn't live without luxury brands, who demanded first-class travel and constant social validation, was now wearing a generic jumpsuit, living in a small cell, and eating prison food. Her social media pages, which she cherished so deeply, were frozen and abandoned, serving as digital tombstones to an ego that destroyed its own life. Sometimes, I sit on my porch in the evening with a cup of coffee, looking out at the garden, and I wonder how someone could throw away real love and a beautiful life for the sake of empty greed. The experience changed me deeply. It taught me that life is a mirror. What you put out into the world eventually reflects back onto you. Sarah and Mark operated on the belief that selfishness was a superpower, that loyalty was a weakness, and that people were just tools to be used and discarded. For a short time, it looked like their philosophy worked. They enjoyed the illusion of victory. But the universe has a way of balancing the scales. Their own greed became the very blindfold that prevented them from seeing the trap they were walking into. I learned that being a good person doesn't mean you have to be a helpless person. You can be kind, you can be loving, and you can be fair, but you must also be strong enough to defend your boundaries when someone attempts to cross them. My intelligence wasn't just a tool for creating engineering software. It was a shield meant to protect my life and my honor. I don't look back on those 7 years of marriage with bitterness anymore. I look at them as a harsh, necessary education. They tried to bury me, but they didn't realize that I was a seed. Today, my company is twice the size it was when the betrayal happened. I have built a new inner circle, one founded on transparent communication, verified integrity, and mutual respect. I no longer take loyalty for granted. I look for it, I cultivate it, and I reward it fiercely. To anyone out there who is currently going through a betrayal, anyone who feels broken, discarded, or left with nothing by someone they loved, do not lose hope. Do not let their malice turn you into a bitter person. When someone tries to ruin you, do not fight them with their dirty tactics. Fight them with your intellect. Fight them with the absolute, unshakable truth. Build your defense quietly, let them celebrate their temporary illusion of success, and wait for the perfect moment to expose reality. Because in the end, lies are like houses built on sand. No matter how beautiful they look, it only takes one wave of truth to wash them away completely. Keep your head high, stay focused, and remember that the best revenge is living a life of absolute honesty, success, and peace that they can never touch.